Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. My name is Thomas Blake. I spent 26 years in law enforcement, 20 of those as a homicide detective for the Chicago Police Department. I retired 4 years ago and traded the grind of crime scenes and interrogation rooms for a quieter life in a modest one-story home on the outskirts of Schaumburg, about 30 miles northwest of downtown. People who've never worked the streets think cops retire and leave it all behind. They don't. You carry it with you, the faces, the decisions, the near misses, the instinct. That instinct saved my life. It was a Friday, the last one in April. The day started like any other. A chilly breeze rattled the trees outside my window just before dawn. My coffee pot hissed to life, and I flipped on the local morning news, not expecting anything more than the usual. Construction updates, weather forecasts, maybe a clip of some alderman kissing babies at a ribbon cutting. Instead, the anchor's voice was tense, eyes darting off camera. Unconfirmed reports of violent disturbances across several districts in the city. We urge residents to stay inside. I turned up the volume. The footage was shaky, shot from a cell phone, possibly near Lawndale. It showed two paramedics pulling someone from the back of an ambulance when the man they were helping lunged, biting, scratching, not just resisting care but attacking. Blood smeared the pavement. Police sirens screamed. The clip cut off. I felt the familiar prickling sensation at the base of my neck. In the job, we called it the sixth sense. My gut told me this wasn't some new designer drug or a viral stunt. I'd seen drug-induced psychosis. This wasn't it. And the news kept repeating the word violent outbreaks. Plural. I grabbed my phone and called my old partner, Detective Mike Salgado. He'd stayed on after I left the department. The line rang once before a breathless voice answered. "Tom, you seeing this?" "Yeah, you working?" "Just got called in. Downtown's going nuts. They're setting up staging areas at the 12th District and, hold on." He paused, and I could hear dispatch traffic in the background. Jesus, they're saying entire blocks are being locked down. Locked down? For how long? No idea. Rumors are all over the place, but they're asking officers not to engage if they don't have to. We're seeing bite injuries, repetitive behavior. It's bad, man. Contagion? That's what people are saying, something fast. No confirmation, but they're using containment protocols. CDC's already been contacted. Then it's not a drill. Definitely not. I paused. You be careful out there, Mike. You too, brother. Stay off the streets. And if anything happens, you go north, not into the city. We hung up. I stood there a moment, hand tightening around my mug, watching the screen. Then the emergency broadcast tone interrupted programming. A red banner appeared. Civil emergency message, Chicago metro area. Local law enforcement and emergency medical services are responding to an unidentified biological incident. Stay indoors. Await further instructions. I'd seen those alerts before, usually for storms or chemical spills, not for biological threats. I moved fast. My Glock 19 was locked in a biometric safe under the bed. I loaded 2 mags, chambered a round, and holstered it in the pancake rig I kept for my active days. I'd left the department with a few privileges, and the concealed carry permit still covered me. I tossed my badge and old CPD ID into my jacket pocket. It might still open a few doors if things went south. Next was my go bag, something every street cop should keep long after they stop wearing the badge. Mine was a black 5.11 tactical backpack with first aid supplies, a wind-up flashlight, water purification tablets, extra ammunition, a police-issue radio scanner, and a solar charger. I added canned food, bottled water, cash, and my spare burner phone. By 9:10 a.m., the neighborhood was oddly quiet. No joggers, no delivery trucks, not even the usual whining lawnmower from across the street. A low-frequency helicopter hum pulsed from the east. I stepped onto the porch and saw it, a pair of UH-60 Blackhawks moving in formation towards the city. Military. I confirmed it. My neighbor across the street, Karen Woodley, stood by her mailbox, staring up at the choppers with a dazed expression. She was a retired nurse in her 60s, widowed, lived alone. We weren't close, but cordial. "Karen," I called. She flinched, turning toward me slowly. Her eyes were red-rimmed and her hands trembled. "You see the news?" I asked, approaching slowly. I don't understand, Tom. Something's happening in the city. My niece works at Northwestern Memorial. She said they've closed the ER. People are biting each other." I nodded. "You need to stay inside, lock your doors, keep your phone charged, fill your bathtub with water." "Is it terrorism?" she whispered. I didn't answer. I just helped her back to her house, double-checked the locks, and told her not to open the door for anyone unless she saw me. By 10:30 a.m., the Schaumburg Police Department posted a statement on their site and social media channels. Citizens were advised to remain at home due to a public safety event spreading from downtown Chicago. By then, I'd heard the first sirens. Ambulances from Hoffman Estates screaming eastbound, probably rerouted to try and support overrun hospitals. I switched over to the Chicago PD encrypted radio using my old scanner. Though most frequencies had been changed, I still had some access from my years of work and a friend in IT. What I heard wasn't good. Officers from the 1st District calling for backup near Millennium Park. Reports of civilians attacking people in the street. Officers bitten and losing consciousness within minutes. Shots fired. Multiple units not responding. I scribbled a list on a legal pad. Supplies, routes, contingency plans. The first rule of surviving any incident is preparation and mobility. My plan was simple. I'd stay put unless the threat spread northwest. Schaumburg had wide streets, low population density, and access to I-90 if I needed to flee west toward Rockford or even Wisconsin. The one downside, suburbia is notoriously unprepared for any disruption longer than a day or two. Once panic sets in, grocery stores and pharmacies get stripped clean. I made my first move at noon. Target was still open. I took the Chevy Tahoe, parked near the rear exit, and entered through the garden section. Most of the employees looked panicked, but the public hadn't descended into chaos yet. I picked up what I could: duct tape, batteries, candles, a pair of Motorola walkies, non-perishables, propane tanks, and a small camp stove. The clerk scanning my things kept glancing at the muted TVs mounted above the electronics section. One screen showed a fire at the Union Station rail yard. Another was broadcasting raw footage of a man covered in blood wandering across Lakeshore Drive before being struck by a delivery van. He stood back up, kept walking. People in line behind me started backing away. At the checkout, the power flickered. I paid in cash and got out fast. By the time I returned home, the neighborhood had shifted. Cars were gone from driveways. Garage doors stood open. A few folks were sitting on porches with guns across their laps. That's when I saw another familiar face. Dr. Eugene Marlowe, a veterinarian from 2 blocks over. He was in his driveway, hauling a pet carrier into the back of a Suburban. His teenage daughter, Lila, stood nearby clutching a black duffel. "Tom," he called. I crossed the street. "You bugging out?" I asked. "I've got family in Janesville. We're heading there before the roads lock down. You hear anything official?" He shook his head. Only what's on the radio, but I've had 3 owners bring in pets they said were acting wrong. One cat was covered in its owner's blood. Another dog wouldn't stop growling at its reflection. That stuck with me, not just because of the obvious, blood, aggression, warning signs, but because animals always notice what humans miss. They hear frequencies we can't, smell things we don't. If dogs were reacting to something in their own reflections, it meant there was something unnatural about this pathogen, something that disrupted behavior down to the primal level. I thanked Eugene, shook his hand, and watched him finish loading his vehicle with medical supplies and a pair of sedated cats. They peeled off a minute later, the Suburban disappearing down the block. The engine faded, leaving a thick, oppressive silence. By 2:45 p.m., I was sweeping the house for weak points. Years of police work taught me where people break in and how fast. Deadbolts don't mean much if the frame isn't reinforced. I secured the front and rear doors with angled steel brackets I'd installed years earlier for storm protection. Windows were double-locked. I nailed a 2x4 across the back patio door frame and added rubber stoppers to each sliding track to prevent forced opening. Upstairs, I dragged a heavy dresser against the hallway access point and stashed an axe and crowbar beneath my bed. I moved through the house like I had when working homicide scenes. Deliberate, methodical, mind ticking off possibilities. Outside, the neighborhood had changed again. I heard gunfire. Sporadic bursts, not the usual crack of handguns either. Sounded like someone had pulled a hunting rifle from storage. Probably Cooper from 2 streets over. He owned a small cabin in Wisconsin and had shown me his Remington 700 at a barbecue 2 summers back. I'd laughed at the time, but now I found myself wishing I had something heavier than a 9mm sidearm. The screaming intensified just after 3:15 p.m. This time it was closer. I took position at the upstairs front window and scanned the street with my binoculars. A tan Chrysler Pacifica was parked diagonally across the intersection, both driver's side doors wide open. A small form was crumpled in the street beside it. I adjusted the lens. Definitely a child. Maybe 10, maybe younger, limp, unmoving, my jaw clenched. Movement near the passenger side. A woman stumbled into view. Blonde, blood on her blouse, a noticeable wound on her arm. She looked dazed, but not mindless. She was trying to scream, mouth open, gasping, but no sound came out. Then I saw what she was backing away from. 3 figures in tattered business casual wear. Office workers by the look of it, all male. One was missing his tie, shirt soaked in dark red, the sleeves torn like he'd been dragged. They walked with that same uneven cadence, forward momentum without purpose or coordination, like drunk marionettes, but they moved fast when they locked on. The woman turned and ran, but she was already slowed by injury. The 3 closed the gap with unnatural speed. She tripped. They were on her before I could reach for my weapon. I turned away not because I was squeamish, but because I knew there was nothing I could do without revealing my position or exposing myself to the street. I moved to the garage. My Tahoe was gassed up, but I hadn't stocked it for a real escape. I loaded it with the essentials: go bag, spare clothing, food, 2 gallons of water, and my bolt cutters. I also grabbed my Mossberg 500 from the cabinet, a tactical shotgun I hadn't fired since the last trip to the range. I loaded it with 00 buckshot shells and racked it with a loud, satisfying click. Then I shut off the garage lights and opened the inner door just enough to monitor the driveway. That's when the pounding started. Back porch, sharp and rhythmic. 3 quick thuds. A pause. Then 2 more. Not random, intentional. I crept toward the rear with the Glock drawn. Through the slit in the blinds, I spotted someone. Human, by all appearances. A teenage boy in a Bears hoodie, shaking, wild-eyed, looking over his shoulder. "Mr. Blake," he whispered loudly. "Please, it's me, Jalen." I exhaled. Jalen Brooks. He lived 3 doors down. 17. Starpoint guard at Schaumburg High. I opened the door and yanked him inside, locking it behind him. He collapsed onto the kitchen floor, gasping. "They got Mr. Abrams," he said between breaths. "Came out of nowhere. We were playing Xbox, then he just changed. Where's your mom?" He didn't answer, just shook his head, eyes glazed. I helped him to the couch and gave him a bottle of water. "You're safe here for now," I said. "But we might have to move." He nodded weakly. By 4 p.m., most of the nearby homes were either dark or barricaded. Smoke from the dealership fire had spread across the horizon, casting a dull orange glow. Traffic had ceased entirely. There was no police response, no fire trucks. Just a few shots every few minutes and the distant shriek of what could no longer be called human. I used that window of relative calm to set up a fallback point in the basement. I had one of those finished units with a separate breaker, storage closets, and a reinforced crawlspace beneath the stairwell. I'd planned on turning it into a wine cellar, but now it would be Plan B. I moved spare supplies down there: water, food, medicine, and a printed map of the regional power grid and hospital zones I kept from an old CPD seminar. Jalen slept for an hour. When he woke up, he looked 10 years older. "Trauma does that." "I saw her," he said softly. "My mom, in the hallway, after Mr. Abrams bit her. She didn't scream or anything, just stared at me." I didn't try to explain it to him. He wouldn't believe me yet. At 5:15 p.m., another group moved down the main street. I counted 7 figures, all wearing uniforms. I lifted my binoculars again: postal service, sanitation, a couple in EMT jackets. All dead. I could tell by the bloodless skin, the way their heads hung slightly to one side, jaws slack and trembling like they were chewing invisible food. One of them, maybe a paramedic, was still wearing an ID badge. It swung loosely with each lurching step. I noticed something else. They weren't wandering randomly. They moved in a broad arc, covering yards and sidewalks in a sweeping pattern. It wasn't smart, but it was systematic. Like something in their brain was still echoing the behavior of their old routines. Postal routes, patrol loops, Pavlovian memory fragments. It chilled me more than their appearance. Around 6 p.m., the lights flickered. Once, twice. Then the house went dark. Power grid failure. I'd expected it, but that didn't make it easier. I lit the emergency lantern and switched to battery mode on the scanner. Still no transmissions, no civilian channels, no first responder traffic. Only white noise. I called Mike again, straight to voicemail. Sunset came at 7:45 p.m. I watched it from the roof with Jalen beside me. He hadn't spoken for 20 minutes. Just sat, knees pulled to his chest, watching the horizon flicker with firelight and sirens that no longer sounded like rescue. "I think I want to be a cop," he said suddenly. I looked at him. "Why?" "Because I want to know how to protect people. I don't ever want to feel like this again." It broke something in me hearing that. I didn't tell him about the cases that haunted me, the ones I couldn't solve, the victims I couldn't save, the hollow victories. I just nodded and said, "Then you better start listening." Because the real lesson of law enforcement isn't in the shooting or the arrests. It's in observation, in understanding what danger looks like a minute before anyone else does. And right now, danger was evolving. At 8:30 p.m., we heard the first one enter the neighborhood. Not stumble in. Enter. Deliberate steps, the sound of a chain-link fence rattling. A low groan, not like the others. We went silent. From the attic window, I watched a figure move with surprising agility along the hedgerow behind the Kaufman place. Tall, thin, wearing what looked like a maintenance uniform. Not staggering. Walking. Smooth, controlled. I squinted through the binoculars, zoomed in. The street lamp above the alley flickered just enough to catch the glint of something metallic at his waist. A set of keys on a retractable coil clipped to his belt. The shirt was dark gray, the kind typically worn by municipal utilities workers. A red patch above the left pocket said Chicago Water, partially obscured by what I first mistook for dirt but quickly realized was dried blood. He wasn't dragging his feet or snarling like the others. This one was methodical, glancing side to side, pausing at each yard gate like he was looking for something. Or someone. He moved with the calm precision of someone used to checking meters or walking routes, but there was no humanity left in his face. His skin was pale gray, mouth slack, and eyes slightly recessed. But those eyes, they weren't clouded like the others I'd seen. They darted, tracked movement, adjusted to light. He was scanning. I pulled away from the window before he could see me. Jalen, crouched beside me with his baseball bat in hand, whispered, "Was that one of them?" "Yeah," I said. "But not like the others. This one's smarter." I turned off the attic light, slid down the ladder, and made my way to the hallway with Jalen behind me. We needed to treat this as a perimeter breach. The others had been unpredictable, swarming at noise, operating like starving animals. This one looked like it was doing reconnaissance, and if it could think, if it could remember habits or navigate obstacles, then it posed a bigger threat than the mindless mobs. Downstairs, I reset the barricades on both doors, then silently made my way to the garage. I eased the side door open and looked through the gap. The backyard was bathed in darkness, the clouds having swallowed the moon. I used my flashlight sparingly, just enough to check the side fence and the rear gate. Nothing had been touched, but I didn't trust it. The smart ones wouldn't announce their arrival. At 9:15 p.m., I heard the first real sign that this wasn't just a citywide event. My emergency scanner, silent for hours, crackled to life with a faint broadcast on the Illinois Mutual Aid channel. Evacuation priority remains Zone 5 to O'Hare Corridor. All units converge to designated checkpoints. Marshal protocol in effect. Do not engage with compromised individuals. Quarantine shelters now full. Repeat, Zone 5 is a confirmed fail. Then static. Zone 5 covered northwest suburbs, Schaumburg, Palatine, Hoffman Estates. That meant everything within a 10-mile radius of us was compromised. No more aid, no rescue vehicles, and no way to reach the O'Hare corridor without crossing major intersections and expressway cloverleafs already jammed with wrecked vehicles. I made my decision. We would not wait for help. At dawn, we'd attempt to move. Back upstairs, I found Jalen in the living room, staring at a family photo I had on the mantel. It was taken 10 years ago, my late wife Cynthia, our daughter Alexis, and me, standing near Navy Pier. Oh, the sky had been clear that day. She was still alive. Alexis was still in middle school. Everything back then felt recoverable. "You miss her?" Jalen asked. "Every day." He nodded and placed the frame down. "I never met my dad. My mom said he left before I was born. She raised me on her own." "You're a good kid," I said. "She did well." The quiet lingered. There wasn't much else to say. At 10 p.m., the power blinked on for exactly 30 seconds. Just long enough for the refrigerator to hum and the microwave to reset its clock. Then it died again, this time for good. When the streetlights didn't follow suit, I realized it wasn't a total grid failure. Someone had rerouted power, and only select zones were being supplied. I took that as confirmation. Something higher up was managing the flow. Maybe to keep critical sectors lit. maybe to trap survivors into moving where they wanted them to go. Jalen drifted to sleep on the couch, bat still clenched in one hand. I stayed awake. Old habits die hard. At 11:45 p.m., motion lights in the backyard snapped on. I was already at the kitchen window by the time they did. A dark shape stood near the compost bin. Broad shoulders, head cocked slightly, listening. Not the same figure from earlier. This one was shorter, bulkier, moving slower. I turned off the interior lights and adjusted the blinds to see better. A second figure emerged from behind the shed. Now they were circling. I crept upstairs, gently shaking Jalen awake as I passed. "We've got company," I whispered. He followed silently, gripping his bat with both hands. I gave him a flashlight and showed him how to hold it under the bat's handle to maintain visibility without creating a blinding tunnel effect. I handed him a spare knife, just in case. He didn't flinch. We moved into the master bedroom and checked each window. From the southeast corner, I had a clear view of the street. 2 more were approaching from the main road. They didn't walk like the first horde. They stalked, heads up, coordinated. One reached the house across from mine and tried the front door. When it didn't open, he circled to the side. The second began tapping on windows. Not banging, tapping. Light, rhythmic, as if searching for vibration. I recognized the tactic. That's how search teams probe buildings in hostage rescues. Quiet, careful, listening for movement inside. That's when it hit me. They weren't just smarter. They were hunting. At midnight, I made the call to fall back to the basement. I sealed off the main floor and moved our gear into the crawlspace beneath the stairs. It was barely tall enough to sit upright, but it had insulation, soundproofed paneling from my failed man cave remodel, and a reinforced hatch. I brought the radio, weapons, and the last of the bottled water. By 12:20 a.m., we were sealed in. We waited, silent. Footsteps overhead. Heavy, deliberate. Something tested the front door, then the garage, then the back. I held my breath. Then came the sound of glass shattering. Not in our house, one door over. Kaufman's. Heavy footfalls followed, a chair scraped. Something crashed, then nothing. Just the kind of nothing that makes your teeth grind and your palms sweat. The kind of nothing that means someone is waiting. At 1:05 a.m., a new sound replaced the quiet. A human voice, a man yelling, "Help, please, they're inside, someone help." I almost broke the seal of the hatch to respond. Jalen reached for the latch too, but I grabbed his wrist and shook my head. My instincts were screaming. The voice repeated, closer, "Help me, I have a kid, please, they're after us." And then it stopped mid-sentence, cut off clean. No scream, no struggle, just terminated. They were mimicking now. I didn't sleep that night, neither did Jalen. We stayed in that crawlspace until dawn, listening to the sounds of inhuman predators adapting to us. Smarter, faster, meaner, and now, apparently, learning. We'd survived the night, but I knew that daylight would bring no relief. Whatever this was, it was evolving, and we were already behind. The first rays of dawn filtered through the narrow cracks around the hatch, casting pale lines across the floor of the crawlspace. My legs were numb from hours of stillness. Jalen had dozed off at some point, head resting against a duffel bag, his bat across his lap. I nudged him gently. He startled but didn't panic. He was learning, adapting, just like I needed him to. We waited another 20 minutes before emerging. Upstairs, the house remained intact. The doors hadn't been breached. The motion lights outside were dead, probably triggered until the battery backup drained. I moved to the front window with a slow, deliberate pace, peeking through the blinds. The street looked empty. no movement. But I didn't believe it. After what we'd heard the night before, the calculated movement, the mimicry, I assumed they were nearby, just out of sight. I turned on the hand crank emergency radio. No updates, no evacuation instructions. Not even automated NOAA alerts. Nothing. I scanned every frequency between 118 and 175 megahertz, hoping for a sheriff's repeater, an aviation loop, anything. Silence. That meant the relays had gone down or were manually shut off. Both possibilities were grim. It was 6:20 a.m. when I finally made the call to leave. The longer we waited, the more likely we'd be cut off completely. I had to assume the smarter infected were tracking by pattern now. Scent, light, even routine. And my home, while secure, wasn't a fortress. Eventually, they'd figure a way in. Jalen helped load the Tahoe. We stripped it down for speed. Just essentials. Food, water, a medkit, 2 firearms, and my bolt cutters. I left behind the heavier tools, sledgehammers, breech bars. They'd slow us. Every pound mattered. I handed Jalen the Mossberg, showed him how to keep it at low ready. The boy had the right instincts. He didn't flinch when I gave him extra shells. He just nodded. I scouted ahead on foot, checking the first 2 cross streets for signs of movement. My neighbors' homes bore signs of struggle. Shattered windows, blood trails, barricades knocked aside. But no bodies. That worried me more than seeing corpses would have. Bodies meant closure. Emptiness suggested cleanup, or worse, conversion. We took Roosevelt Road west toward Hoffman Estates. I figured our best bet was to avoid major intersections and use residential routes. I knew that area better than most. It was where I spent the last 5 years of my career, working gang suppression and organized crime leads. The municipal lot behind the old fire station on Hassel Road had a buried diesel tank and a backup generator. It was our destination. At 7:10 a.m., we encountered the first group of survivors. 3 men and a woman had set up a makeshift barricade at the intersection of Schick Road and Springenskooth. They used 2 lifted pickups and a city salt spreader to block traffic with sandbags and pallets stacked in an L pattern. They were armed. At least one had an AR-15. The others used handguns and a crossbow. The woman signaled us to stop with an open hand, but her stance was steady, professional. I slowed the Tahoe, window cracked. "Friendly," I called out. "Name's Blake. Retired CPD, just passing through." The lead man stepped forward, mid-40s, grizzled, wearing a Cook County Department of Corrections jacket. He looked me over, then glanced at Jalen. "You the only 2? "For now." He gave a short nod. "Name's Torres. We're holding this block for as long as we can. Got 6 more inside the house behind us, 2 are kids. You're welcome to pass through, but we can't spare supplies." "Not asking for any," I replied. "You seen the smart ones yet?" His expression tightened. "Last night. One got in through the attic vent. Watched us sleep for almost 10 minutes before it moved. Took a chunk out of Lindsay before we dropped it." That confirmed it. Stealth, patience, coordinated entry points. These weren't rabid infected. They were evolving toward predators. I thanked Torres and moved on. As we pulled away, I looked in the rearview mirror. He was already scanning the rooftops, finger tight on the trigger. At 7:45 a.m., we passed by Conan High School. Smoke drifted from the gymnasium's west side. The windows were broken. Dozens of cars in the parking lot had been left haphazardly, some with doors ajar, some with luggage still strapped to their roofs. It looked like a failed shelter attempt. I didn't stop to investigate. That kind of scene rarely yields survivors. We took side streets for another mile before encountering our first direct threat. As we passed a narrow corridor between a CVS and a closed car wash, something hit the passenger side window with the force of a sledgehammer. The glass cracked but held. I braked hard, spun the wheel, and saw the attacker scramble upright. Young, female, maybe college-aged. What was left of a Schaumburg boomer's hoodie hung off her shoulders. Her arms were raw down to the muscle, fingers clawed and black with the dried blood. She hissed and slammed the window again, eyes unfocused but locked on us. Jalen didn't hesitate. He leaned out the rear window, took aim with the shotgun, and fired. The blast turned her sideways, knocking her into a row of garbage bins. I kept the vehicle rolling. We didn't slow again. By 8:30 a.m., we reached the Hoffman Estates Municipal Yard. It was partially burned, the outer gate torn from the hinges, but the building itself still stood. I parked behind a mound of salt and surveyed the area. No movement. We entered through the rear maintenance bay. Inside, we found evidence of a last stand, spent shell casings, overturned barricades, blood pooled under the break room table. A body lay near the generator room. Male, mid-50s, still wearing a public works vest. His weapon, a SIG P226, was gripped in his right hand. Empty mag. I retrieved 2 full ones from his belt. The generator was offline, fuel lines intact. I flipped the breaker and watched the backup system hum to life. Lights flickered. Security cams rebooted. One of the monitors showed the roof, a camera feed I hadn't expected to still work. That's when I saw them. 3 figures standing on the adjacent building, not moving, watching the generator building. They had climbed the fire escape. They were learning elevation. "We can't stay here," I said, turning away from the monitor. "But we just got here," Jalen replied. "I know, but they saw the lights come on. They know where we are now." We gathered what we could: 2 fuel canisters, spare batteries, a flare gun, and loaded the Tahoe. The second we pulled away, the 3 on the rooftop began to move. They didn't chase, not immediately. They just stepped off the edge, landing wrong, bones cracking, but they stood again. Pain didn't matter. Not to them. At 9:15 a.m., I received a short-range radio ping from another vehicle. A repeating Morse code signal. I recognized it as the Department of Homeland Security's emergency frequency. I locked on and got static, then a voice. "Operating rally point at Glenview Naval Air Station. Grid access restricted. Clearance required. Repeat. Glenview Naval." The feed cut. It wasn't far. If the base was active, it meant someone was still organizing. Military units had fallback plans for biological emergencies. Glenview had been decommissioned, but sections were rumored to be kept in reserve for scenarios just like this. Classified, subterranean, hardened. I looked at the map. We'd need to skirt north through Des Plaines and Park Ridge. It was risky, but staying in the open was worse. By 10 a.m., the Tahoe was riding low from fuel loss. We hit an abandoned gas station off Gulf Road. I siphoned fuel from a parked RV while Jalen watched the perimeter. Wind picked up. Distant sirens echoed, slow, rising. Not the usual kind. A long, mechanical whine, like a flood warning or a chemical spill. Then silence again. At 10:45 a.m., we crossed into Niles. The roads were clogged, cars jammed at angles, bodies trapped inside. We stayed on foot, cutting through alleys, climbing fences. A few of the infected were slow, old models, the first wave types, mindless, still dangerous. But the real threat now was the new kind. At 11:30 a.m., we heard the growling. Not animal, not human. A low, vibrating sound coming from behind a row of houses. Then the crash of a gate being torn off its hinges. They had found us again. We ran, cutting through backyard after backyard, hopping fences, ducking beneath clotheslines and patio furniture. One of them lunged from behind a shed, tall, fast, and silent. I fired twice with the Glock, hitting it in the chest. It didn't flinch. Jalen brought the bat down on its knees, then I finished it with a shot to the head. By noon, we reached the edge of Glenview. A large perimeter had been established: barriers, floodlights, concrete dividers. Men in hazmat suits waved us down as we emerged from the tree line. One of them raised a weapon, but I held up my hands and called out our names and former departments. A moment of hesitation, then a nod. "Get them inside," someone said. We were pulled through decontamination, scanned for infection signs, then processed into what looked like a makeshift triage center built into the old hangars. There were others: medics, civilians, even a few soldiers. Glenview hadn't fallen. Not yet. I sat on a cot, finally letting myself breathe. We had survived the first 12 hours. But something told me the worst was still ahead. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.